All right, we've got a program over here, and we're going to step through the program, and we're going to see the changes that occur in the accumulator, in the registers, and in various memory locations. Before I start, let me load the accumulator with 0, 0, which is what we would have had to start out with. So, first step is we're going to take the literal value 20 hex and move it into R0. So we're going to see 20 hex in R0. All of the numbers are in hex, so I'm not going to put the designator for hex. The next step is we're going to take the literal value 40 hex and move it into R2. So that 40 goes in there. And then the next step is to move the literal value FF into R7. So we move FF into R7. And then we move the literal value 30 hex into R1. We move the literal value 11 hex into the accumulator. And now we're ready to do some addition. So we're going to take the value that's the contents of R1 and we're going to add it to the contents of the accumulator. The accumulator has 11 in it. R1 has 30 in it. So we're going to add 30 to the 11 and we're going to end up with 41. So that means I end up with 41 in the accumulator. We're going to take the contents of the accumulator and move it to memory location 40 hex. So down in 40 hex, we're going to see the contents of the accumulator, which was 41. We're going to take the contents of R7 and move it into the accumulator. R7 has FF, so we're going to move FF into the accumulator. We're going to subtract the contents of R1 from the contents of the accumulator. So the contents of the accumulator is FF. The contents of R1 is 30. So F minus 0 is just F. F, which is like 15. 15 minus 3 is 12. 12 in hex is C. So my accumulator is now going to have CF in it. We're going to take the contents of the accumulator and move it to the memory location pointed to by R0. Remember, when we see the @ sign, that means we have to go to wherever this is to find out which memory location we're going to place the data from the accumulator into. So we say that it's pointed to by R0. R0 is pointing to memory location 20. So that means the contents of the accumulator is going to go into 20. So this would almost be the same as, after we've gone to R0, is the same as take the contents of the accumulator and move it into memory location 20, since that's where R0 is pointing. Well, the contents of the accumulator is CF, so we're going to put that in memory location 20. We're going to increment R0, so my R0 is going to become 21. We're going to increment R1, so my R1 becomes 31. We're going to increment R2, so my R2 becomes 41. We're going to take the literal value 11 and move that into the accumulator. So now my accumulator now has 11 in it. We're going to add the contents of R1 to the contents of the accumulator. The contents of the accumulator is 11. The contents of R1 is now 31. So 1 plus 1 is 2, 1 plus 3 is 4, so this is now 42 in the accumulator. We're going to take the contents of the accumulator and move it into memory location 41 hex. So the accumulator, which has 42, is now in memory location 41. We're going to take the contents of R7, which is FF, and move that into the accumulator. So my accumulator is now going to have FF in it. And we're going to subtract the contents of R1, which is 31, from the contents of the accumulator, which is FF. So we've got FF in the accumulator, and we're going to subtract the 31 from R1 from that. F minus 1 is E. Remember, F is like 15. 15 minus 3 is 12. 12 in hex is C. So my accumulator now has CE in it. We're going to move the contents of the accumulator to the memory location pointed to by R0. R0 is pointing to 21, so we're going to take the CE and put it in memory location 21. We're going to increment R0, so my R0 is now going to have 22 in it. We're going to increment R1, so R1 is now going to have 32 in it. We're going to increment R2, so R2 is now going to have 42 in it. We're going to move 11, the literal value 11, into the accumulator, so we're going to put 11 in here. We're going to add the contents of R1 to the contents of the accumulator. So the contents of the accumulator is 11. We're going to add to that the contents of R1, which is 32. 1 plus 2 is 3. 1 plus 3 is 4. So the accumulator is going to have 43 in it. We're going to move the contents of the accumulator to memory location 42. So the 43 that's in the accumulator is going to move to memory location 42. We're going to move the contents of R7 into the accumulator. R7 has FF. And then we're going to subtract the contents of R1 from the accumulator. So the accumulator has FF. The contents of the accumulator has FF. We're going to subtract R1 from that. R1 has 22 in it. R1 has 32 in it. F is 15. 15 minus 2 is 13. 13 is D in hex. F is 15 minus 3 is 12. 12 is C in hex. So my accumulator is now going to have CD in it. We're going to take the contents of the accumulator, move it to the memory location pointed to by R0. R0 is pointing to memory location 22. So the contents of the accumulator, which is CD, is going to go into memory location 22. And that's my last step, and that finishes the problem.